The Crestwood family's monthly dinners were less about food and more about financial peacocking. This evening, in the sprawling estate outside Sonoma Valley, promised to be especially unbearable. I took my usual seat near the fireplace, quietly observing while my cousins competed to see who could brag the loudest. "Just bought a lodge in Aspen," Dalton drawled, swirling his wine, "right next to the guy who owns half of Tech Haven." "Please," scoffed Vivian, flipping her designer clutch open with a flourish. "We just closed on a chateau in Provence. Private access to the Riviera. You can't even put a price on that kind of view." I hid my smile behind my glass of iced tea. If only they knew. "Lila," Aunt Marjorie's voice cut sharply across the table. "You've been awfully quiet." Dalton leaned in, his faux sympathy dripping. "We were just wondering about your living situation." And there it was. "What about it?" I replied, setting down my glass. "This cramped duplex in Seattle," he said. "Still renting, right?" "The one on Pine Avenue?" Vivian added, feigning surprise. "Didn't know people our age still rented?" I nearly laughed. The Pine Avenue complex was my company's first commercial acquisition under Northridge Ventures. To them, I was a struggling tenant. In reality, I was the owner. "I like the space," I said evenly. "You're 35, sweetie," Marjorie added with a patronizing smile. "It's time to grow up, buy something real." Real? Try a $1.8 billion portfolio of multifamily buildings, commercial towers, and yes, Crestwood Tower, the very property they gathered in monthly. 6 months ago, I acquired it discreetly through a private equity arm they'd never trace back to me. "I've managed just fine," I replied. Dalton smirked. "You can't even afford a mortgage." I leaned back and let them talk, because soon the lease renewal would come across their desks, and guess whose name would be on the letterhead? Dad finally glanced up from his wine glass. Now, Dalton, not everyone's blessed with your sharp instincts. Lila chose her path." Aunt Marjorie chimed in with a sigh, as though I'd disappointed them by not marrying a venture capitalist or becoming a lifestyle influencer. They thought I spent my days showing cheap walk-ups to broke grad students, barely scraping by on commission checks. What they didn't know was that Lila Vane, the family underachiever, was also Northridge Ventures, the anonymous firm quietly snapping up commercial and residential properties throughout the Pacific Northwest for the last decade. "Speaking of real estate," Vivian interjected with a sparkle in her eye, "have you heard about that situation on Pine Avenue? Some firm bought the entire block. They're going to knock it all down." She added with mock pity, "Guess that little apartment of yours will finally go." I kept my expression neutral. I was the buyer, and I had no intention of tearing anything down. The Pine Avenue complex was a hidden gem. Brick facades, vintage detailing, and rent protections for families who'd lived there for decades. I was deep in a historically respectful renovation. "Really?" I asked. "Hadn't heard?" "Well, of course not," Dalton smirked. "Deals that size are way out of your league." "If you get booted," Marjorie said brightly, "you can always move back into the guest house. We'll help you find something more respectable. Maybe even someone respectable." "I'm happy," I said flatly. "And so is my landlord." Vivian gave a tight laugh. "You can't live a small life forever, dear. Vane used to mean something in this state." It still did, just not the way they thought. In real estate circles, Northridge was synonymous with ethical growth and tenant-first investing, the antithesis of my cousin's flashy developments that bulldozed communities for clout. "Actually," Dad said, setting down his glass, "this meeting's partly about business. The board's worried about the new owner of Crestwood Tower." I tilted my head. "Northridge Ventures bought a majority stake 6 months ago," he said. "No one knows who they are. Possibly a foreign investor." Dalton nodded. "Has to be. These tycoons love legacy properties. If only they knew that their feared mystery investor was sitting right here in a thrifted cardigan and scuffed boots." "And now," Dad continued, "they're asking tough questions, especially about our accounting practices. Creative accounting, like the way Dalton borrowed from the building fund to finance his Aspen Lodge, or how Vivian labeled her luxury handbags as client engagement expenses." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Aunt Marjorie said, her pearls twitching with unease. The Vane name still means something. That's just it, Dad cut in. This Northridge person doesn't seem impressed by names. They've ordered a full audit. I watched the shift ripple across their faces. Panic, tightly veiled behind designer smiles. An audit would uncover more than just questionable expenses. It would crack their whole game wide open. Maybe Lila could help, Vivian said suddenly, her tone sugary. She works in real estate, doesn't she? They all turned to me at once. Just like that, I was no longer an embarrassment. I was potentially useful. I mostly work with smaller residential clients, I said smoothly. Nothing on the scale of Crestwood Tower. For God's sake, Dalton snapped. You can't even help your own family? Mom gave him a warning glance, but her silence said enough. Even Dad was back to scrolling, uninterested in defending me. They had no idea how helpful I was about to be, just not in the way they hoped. Tomorrow morning, Northridge Ventures would release a public statement. Effective immediately, Crestwood Tower would undergo major operational reform. No more shadow budgets, no more nepotistic contracts, no more charging the building like it was a family credit card. I glanced around the penthouse. Artwork bought with maintenance funds, couches triple their listed price, fixtures installed by Vivian's husband's firm with bloated invoices. Anyway, I said, rising and brushing off my jeans. Some of us have early mornings. Vivian smirked. Off to show more rent-controlled studios? I slung my worn leather bag over my shoulder. Inside, the board briefing, legal filings, and renovation proposals worth more than anything in this room. No, Lila, Aunt Marjorie called sweetly. Next time, maybe dress more like a Vane. Appearances matter, I smiled. Don't worry, I said. Tomorrow, I'll look exactly like the Vanes expect. They just didn't realize I was already the one running the show. The next morning, I stood in my real office, an entire penthouse floor overlooking downtown Seattle, and prepared for the moment I'd planned for over a year. My assistant, Elise, walked in briskly, setting a cappuccino beside my laptop. The Crestwood Tower board is already seated, she said. Your family got here early, trying to charm the independent members. I smirked, imagining Dalton and Vivian working the room in desperation. Audit packets all printed and distributed? The forensic team uncovered even more than expected, she paused. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once they know, there's no turning back. They need to learn, I said quietly. That legacy isn't a license to abuse power. I turned to the glass, catching my reflection. Gone were the jeans and cardigan. Today, I wore a deep navy Armani suit. Sharp lines, soft strength, the kind of look Aunt Marjorie used to dream I'd wear to meet a husband. Instead, I'd wear it to dismantle their house of cards. The ownership announcement goes live in 20 minutes, Elise added. Once it hits, you'll be unmasked. Then let's begin, I said, picking up my briefcase. The Crestwood Tower boardroom hushed as I entered. My family was clustered at the far end, unnerved, underdressed, and visibly rattled. Who are you? Dalton barked. This is a private meeting. I calmly placed my briefcase at the head of the table. I'm Lila Vane, I said, founder and sole owner of Northridge Ventures, the company that owns this building and several others your family leveraged illegally. Marjorie turned ghost white. Vivian's lips parted, but no sound came. My father's hands tightened on his pen. Lila, he breathed. I nodded. Good morning. I opened the briefcase and began sliding audit reports across the table. Shall we review your financials? This is insane, Dalton stammered. You're just... What? I asked. The black sheep? The renter? The woman in consignment clothes? Vivian blinked. But you show apartments. I work, I said simply. And I built something real, with integrity, not illusion. The board watched, stunned, as the proud Vane family began to unravel one page at a time. These folders, I said, contain detailed documentation of every misused fund, inflated invoice, and falsified receipt. Reports of financial irregularities involving Crestwood Tower's accounts. I began distributing the final set of documents. Dalton, would you care to explain the $2 million in roof repairs that financed your Aspen property? He flushed so hard and fast I thought he might pass out. Or Vivian, I continued, flipping the next page. Maybe you'd like to walk us through your husband's invoices, charging 3 times the market rate for basic plumbing. You'd air out your own family's laundry like this? Aunt Marjorie gasped. No, I said evenly. You aired it out. I'm just making sure it gets cleaned. Dad finally spoke, voice low and pleading. Lila, sweetheart, we can explain. Don't, I said, raising a hand. I've watched this family treat our great-grandfather's legacy like a personal ATM while you mocked my so-called humble life. I was building something better, on values, not vanity. But why? Vivian asked, dazed. Why pretend to be struggling? I didn't pretend anything, I replied. I lived modestly, I invested wisely. You assumed wealth had to be loud. The Pine Avenue building, Dalton said, stunned. You really live there? I own it, I corrected, and most of the block. And no, I'm not demolishing it because some of us care about people, not just returns. Suddenly, phones around the table buzzed. One board member looked up, reading from his screen. Northridge Ventures reveals CEO's identity. Lila Vane, estranged member of the Vane family, confirmed as owner of $2 billion real estate portfolio. Vivian fumbled her phone. Ranked among top ethical developers, she muttered. Historic preservation, tenant protections. This will ruin us, Vivian whispered, pale. No, I said firmly. This will save you from yourselves. Effective today, Crestwood Tower will operate transparently. No more shell games, no more sweetheart contracts. And if we don't comply? Dalton tried to sound bold, but his voice trembled. I smiled. Then I'll pass these reports to the authorities. I'm sure the IRS would find them enlightening. Silence thickened. What do you want? Dad finally asked. I want you to remember what the Vane name meant before all this. I met their eyes one by one. Great-grandfather built communities, not just profit margins. I stood, gathering my papers. You have a choice. Work with me to restore that legacy, I said evenly, or find somewhere else to live. I hear there are some lovely rentals in Lake Tahoe. I turned to leave. Lila, wait! Dad's voice stopped me just as I reached the door. I was wrong about you. Yes, I replied quietly. You were. The aftermath unfolded like something out of a business drama. The media couldn't get enough of the hidden heir of Seattle who'd quietly built a real estate empire and dismantled her family's illusions in one board meeting. Aunt Marjorie resigned from 3 local boards, too ashamed to show her face. Vivian's husband's firm folded within weeks of the audit release. But not all of it was bitter. Dalton, finally facing actual consequences, enrolled in a public university's real estate program. Vivian began volunteering at a transitional housing shelter downtown. She told me later it gave her more purpose than her gallery openings ever had. And Dad? He asked to learn the business, not as a father reclaiming control, but as a student. This time, he wanted to understand what I'd built. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Pine Avenue apartment, yes, I kept it, reviewing new quarterly reports. Crestwood Tower was thriving. Leases were stable, tenant satisfaction was up, and small retailers on the ground floor were turning healthy profits. A knock broke my focus. I opened the door to find my mother. She wore jeans and no makeup. It took me a moment to process the casualness. I got your invitation, she said, holding it up. A courtyard holiday party. I nodded. It's not quite your scene. No, she admitted, glancing around my modest space, but I'm learning that maybe scene isn't everything. She picked up a photo, me at 23, beaming at my real estate license ceremony. I never asked, she said. Why this path? Because I wanted to build something real, I replied, not just buy it and flaunt it. And now, she murmured, you control more than all of us. I do, I nodded, but control isn't the goal. Purpose is. She looked at me seriously. Will you teach me? Come tonight, I said. Meet the families who've lived here for decades. Listen, that's where legacy begins. Later, I stood by my window, watching lights twinkle across Seattle. The city I'd quietly made mine. Crestwood Tower glowed in the distance, no longer a monument to greed, but a symbol of restoration. Below me, the Pine Avenue building buzzed with quiet life. Brickwork, original wood beams, and garden courtyards preserved with care. My phone pinged with new messages, partnership offers, speaking invitations, acquisition deals. Northridge Ventures was in high demand now, but I kept my schedule humane, my routine grounded. Success to me wasn't about outshining my past. It was about building something that mattered, something that would last. A week later, at the Pine Avenue holiday party, I stood by the garden fountain, watching my family acclimate to a world they once dismissed. Mom sat beside Mrs. Garcia, a tenant here for 38 years, listening with genuine interest. Dalton helped string lights with Mr. Russo, a World War II veteran and longest-term resident. Vivian laughed beside a table of kids icing sugar cookies. Slowly, they were learning. Real wealth isn't in what you can flaunt, it's in what you preserve, what you share, what you elevate. Dad joined me near the cocoa table. "You know," he said, "your great-grandfather believed buildings should shelter hearts, not just wallets." I nodded. I found his old ledgers, handwritten notes about protecting tenants. We forgot that. He looked at me, not like a daughter who'd gone off track, but like someone who'd carried the torch he'd dropped. "You could have ruined us." "Never the point," I said, watching a little girl twirl under the fairy lights. I wanted to build something that would outlast me. And sometimes, the greatest success isn't in proving them wrong. It's in offering them a better version of right.